Do you believe in setting boundaries, even if it means losing people?
Every single year, without fail, my birthday came and went with the same excuse tossed at me like it was supposed to make me feel better. It's just too close to the holidays. You know how it is. It's a busy time for everyone. And yet, somehow, magically, my brother's birthday, which landed not too far from mine on the calendar, always managed to be an event, an actual celebration with balloons, a cake, a whole group of relatives gathered, and a fuss made big enough to post about on Facebook. It didn't matter if the family had 1,000 things going on, his day always mattered, while mine was treated like a minor inconvenience they could gloss over with a last-minute card or a half-hearted phone call. When I was a kid, I used to believe their excuses. I told myself they probably did love me just as much, and maybe they were just too tired or too broke by the end of the year to throw another party. I told myself this so many times that it became my way of coping, because the alternative, admitting to myself that maybe they just didn't value me the same way they valued him, was too hard to accept. But even as a kid, I noticed the difference. I noticed how they would save up for his big day in the spring, how they would plan weeks in advance, how my mom would bake his favorite cake from scratch, while mine usually came from a grocery store bakery and sometimes didn't happen at all. I remember one year, I must have been about 9 or 10, when I asked if I could have a party like my brother's. I had made a little list of who I wanted to invite from school. I even wrote down the games we could play. I handed that list to my mom, feeling so excited, thinking maybe this would be the year they took my day seriously. She looked at it and sighed, like I'd just asked her for a trip to Disneyland, and said, "Honey, it's just not a good time right now. People are busy with the holidays, and we can't expect them to come to another party so soon after Christmas." I still remember that feeling, standing there with my little list, realizing she wasn't even going to try. That was the first time I felt that weird mixture of disappointment and embarrassment, like I had asked for too much just by wanting the same thing my brother got without question. And here's the part that really stuck with me over the years. My brother never seemed to notice or care that I got less. If he did, he never said a word. On his birthdays, he'd bask in the attention, open his gifts, and never once acknowledge that mine had been skipped just a couple months earlier. I don't blame him for being a kid and enjoying his day, but as we got older and I realized he knew exactly how differently we were treated, that silence started to feel less like ignorance and more like indifference. By the time I hit my teens, the tradition was solid. I'd get maybe a slice of cake after dinner, usually leftover from Christmas, and a gift that felt more like an afterthought than something picked with me in mind. My brother would still get full-scale celebrations, sometimes even surprise parties, with everyone posting about how amazing he was and how proud they were of him. And me? If I was lucky, a couple relatives would remember to text me. It sounds small when you say it out loud, right? Just a birthday. People tell you it's not a big deal. But when it happens year after year, and you watch someone else in the same family get everything you wish you had, it gets under your skin. It's not about the cake or the presents, it's about what those things represent. Attention, effort, care. Being treated like your life matters enough to be celebrated. And that's the thing I could never shake, the feeling that my life just wasn't celebrated the same way as was. One of the last times I ever bothered to ask for anything special was in my early 20s. I was already living on my own, working long hours, and I thought maybe if I hosted my own birthday dinner, they'd show up and make it a nice night. I invited them, even offered to cook. My mom said they'd try to make it, but weren't sure because they had a lot going on. My dad didn't say much at all. My brother told me he had plans with friends, but maybe could stop by if there was time. On the actual day, none of them came. I sat there in my apartment with the table set, food ready, and not one knock on the door. My phone lit up later that night with a text from my mom. "Happy birthday, sweetheart. We'll do something another time." That another time never came. That was the night something in me shifted. I stopped asking. I stopped giving them the chance to disappoint me in the same way again. But I also stopped telling them much of anything about my life. If I was going to be treated like an afterthought, then I'd start acting like they didn't need to know what I was doing at all. And that decision, the one to go quiet, was the seed for everything that came later. Because the last time I ever asked for a birthday cake ended in a way I still haven't forgiven them for. And that, right there, was when the clock started ticking on a very different kind of celebration, one they would never see coming. You would think that once you grow up, move out, and start living your own life, some of the old wounds from childhood would fade, or at least stop getting reopened year after year. But in my case, it was like the pattern had been set in stone, and no matter how much time passed or how old I got, my birthday was still the one thing nobody in my family could seem to treat as anything more than a minor inconvenience. A date that always fell victim to the same tired excuse about being too close to the holidays. And what made it so much harder to swallow was the fact that while my day came and went almost unnoticed, my brother's birthday continued to be treated as this shining, non-negotiable event that everyone had to rally around. It didn't matter if it fell during someone's busy work week, if relatives were sick, or if money was tight, they would all find a way to show up for him, and not just show up, but make it grand, make it feel like it mattered, make sure it was something worth talking about. When I was in my mid-20s, there was one year that really burned itself into my memory because it was so blatant it almost felt like they were daring me to say something. My brother turned 30 that spring, and the family threw him a massive party at a rented hall with catered food, a DJ, speeches, and a slideshow of photos from his life that someone had clearly spent weeks putting together. Every cousin, aunt, and family friend was invited. People flew in from out of state. It was a whole production, the kind of thing you see in movies when a family really wants to mark a milestone. A few months later, when my birthday rolled around, I got a group text from my parents with the message, "Happy birthday. Love you." That was it. No dinner, no get-together, not even a card. I remember sitting there staring at that text and thinking, how do you even pretend these two situations are remotely the same? I never brought it up to them directly, because by that point I had learned that pointing out the difference only led to more excuses, and sometimes even made me look petty in their eyes. They would say things like, "Oh, don't make it about competition. It's just hard to plan something that time of year," or, "You know we love you. You don't need a party to prove it," as if the absence of effort wasn't the whole point. And my brother? He'd just shrug it off if I hinted at it, and sometimes he'd even laugh like I was making a joke. Over time, I started keeping more and more distance, not out of some big, dramatic decision to cut them off, but because it was exhausting to keep showing up for people who clearly didn't show up for me in the same way. The funny part is, once I stopped pushing for my birthday to be acknowledged, the gap between how they treated me and how they treated him became even more obvious. My brother still got surprise parties in his 30s. One year they flew him to Vegas with my parents covering the entire trip. They made photo albums for him, had matching t-shirts printed for a family celebration, I'm not even kidding, and wrote long Facebook posts about how proud they were of him. I got, at best, a phone call if they remembered. And I don't mean a long, heartfelt call where they asked about my life and shared updates. I mean a quick, "Hey, happy birthday. We'll talk soon," followed by silence for another month. It wasn't just the birthdays either. Once I started looking at the bigger picture, I realized the same pattern was happening with other milestones. When my brother bought his first house, my parents threw him a huge barbecue and bought him expensive furniture as a gift. When I moved into my first apartment, they didn't even see it for 6 months, and when they did, the only comment my mom made was that it was smaller than she thought. When my brother got a new job, they opened champagne. When I got a promotion, they said, "Oh, nice," and changed the subject. It was like there was this unspoken family rule that his accomplishments were a reflection on them, while mine were just mine, separate and unimportant. I think that's when something in my brain started to click, when I started to connect the dots and realize that if I wanted to be celebrated, if I wanted recognition, I wasn't going to get it from them, not in any real way. And that's when my approach to them began to shift. I stopped volunteering information about what I was doing. I stopped giving them chances to minimize my life. I became polite but distant, and on the surface, it probably looked like I was just busy, but underneath, I was deliberately creating a gap between what they knew and what was actually happening with me. And here's a question I'd ask anyone who's ever been in my shoes, because I know I'm not the only one who's been through this. If your family had a pattern of downplaying every important moment in your life while going all out for someone else, would you keep trying to get their approval, or would you eventually decide to stop sharing anything with them at all? Because I can tell you now, once I made the choice to pull back, it was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. I no longer felt that anxious pit in my stomach waiting for them to forget me again, because I was already operating on the assumption that they would. But here's the thing, pulling back wasn't just about self-preservation, it was about planting the seeds for something bigger. I didn't know exactly what that would look like yet, but I knew that if I ever wanted to turn the tables, the first step would be to make sure they never saw it coming. And little by little, year after year, I kept that quiet distance, storing up every memory of their indifference, every text that felt like an afterthought, every moment they chose him over me, and all of it started to feel less like pain and more like fuel. Because eventually, I wasn't just going to protect myself, I was going to make a move they would never forget. And when I did, it would be on my terms. Once I stopped giving them the kind of access to my life that allowed them to minimize my achievements or treat my milestones like footnotes, something interesting started to happen. I began to see just how much energy I had been wasting trying to get their attention in the first place, and how much more productive I could be when I redirected that energy into something that actually mattered to me instead of into a bottomless pit of family approval I was never going to get. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending over backwards to make sure they knew what was going on with me, and without that constant cycle of hoping for recognition and bracing for disappointment, I found myself with the mental space to think about what I truly wanted, not just in some vague someday sense, but in a concrete, tangible way that I could actually start working toward. One of those wants had been in the back of my mind for years, owning a loft. Not just any loft, but the kind of open, airy space I could turn into exactly what I wanted without someone else's taste or opinions getting in the way. It wasn't just about the physical space, it was about independence, control, and building something that was entirely mine from the ground up. I had talked myself out of it before, telling myself it was too ambitious or that I should wait until I had more savings or a more predictable career path, but after years of being treated like my accomplishments didn't matter, I realized I was tired of waiting for the right time. I wanted to build something for myself now on my own terms, without needing anyone's approval or input, and without ever giving them the satisfaction of being able to say they were part of it. I didn't tell anyone, not even my closest friends, what I was planning. At first, it was partly because I didn't want to hear the doubts or the casual discouragement that people sometimes give without realizing how much it sticks with you, but as the months went by, it became more about strategy. The less people knew, the less chance there was for the news to trickle back to my family before I was ready. I started running numbers late at night, cutting back on unnecessary spending, taking on extra projects at work, and even picking up a few side gigs that I could do quietly without drawing attention. It wasn't glamorous, it was exhausting, actually, but every time I put away another chunk of money, I felt this deep sense of satisfaction knowing I was inching closer to something that was going to be mine alone. Meanwhile, my family still thought I was just getting by. My brother would make little comments about how I should get serious about my career. My parents would ask in that concerned but condescending tone if I was doing okay financially, and I would just smile and tell them I was fine. I let them think I was coasting, maybe even struggling a little, because I wanted them to underestimate me. I wanted them to believe the version of me they had created in their minds, the one who would never have anything big to brag about, the one who would always be just slightly behind. It wasn't easy to bite my tongue when they made those comments, but I knew every condescending remark would make the reveal later that much sweeter. The process of finding the right place took longer than I expected, partly because I was being picky and partly because I refused to settle for something that didn't feel like the exact payoff I'd been working toward. There were moments where I was tempted to rush it, to grab the first loft that was good enough just so I could finally tell the world, but I forced myself to wait until it was perfect. In the meantime, I kept my daily life looking exactly the same from the outside, same small apartment, same old car, same casual updates to friends and coworkers about nothing particularly exciting happening. I even skipped a couple of family gatherings so there'd be fewer chances for them to notice anything different about me. The day I finally found the place, it felt almost surreal. I toured it, ran the numbers again to make sure I wasn't being impulsive, and then I signed the paperwork without telling a single person. The keys were mine, the space was mine, and the satisfaction was something I couldn't put into words. For months I had been living with this quiet, determined energy, knowing that every small sacrifice was leading to this moment, and now I had something to show for it, something tangible that they could never claim credit for. I moved things in slowly over the course of a couple of weeks, deliberately keeping my social media quiet and my answers vague when anyone asked what I'd been up to. By the time my birthday started creeping up on the calendar again, I already knew how I wanted to handle it. There would be no invitations, no calls to remind anyone, no hint that anything worth celebrating was happening in my life. I would do exactly what they had done to me for years, act like nothing significant was going on, except my version came with a twist. This time, I was the one holding the real surprise. Because when the day finally came, I was going to make one single, quiet announcement that would flip the entire narrative they had built about me upside down, and there would be no taking it back, no pretending they had been part of it. No way to rewrite the story to put themselves in the center. By the time I had the keys in my hand, the plan was already set in my mind. And the best part was, they had no idea what was coming. They thought this birthday would be like all the others, easy to ignore, easy to forget, and that was exactly why it was going to hit so hard when they realized just how wrong they were. When my birthday finally rolled around that year, I kept my morning exactly as uneventful as they had probably assumed it would be, going through my usual routine without giving away the slightest hint that anything significant was about to happen. Because I knew the impact of what I was about to do relied entirely on the element of surprise, and the beauty of it was that they had conditioned themselves over the years to expect absolutely nothing from me on that day. I didn't post one of those vague, another year older statuses. I didn't text anyone with a hint that I was celebrating, and I certainly didn't send out any invitations or make calls to coordinate something. I wanted them to go about their day as they always had on my birthday, barely remembering it until someone brought it up, maybe tossing out a lazy text sometime in the evening if they thought of it at all, because the less they suspected, the harder the hit would land when they saw what I had actually been doing. While they were ignoring me. By midday, I still hadn't heard from anyone in the family except for my aunt, who sent a quick, "Happy birthday, hope you're doing well," text that I appreciated, even though it came without any real follow-up. My parents hadn't called, my brother hadn't messaged, and I could almost picture them going about their day without a second thought, just as they had so many times before. It was perfect. I spent the early part of the afternoon moving the last few boxes into my new loft, arranging them just enough so the place didn't look empty, and then I took the photo, one single picture of me standing in the middle of my new space, holding the keys in my hand with the caption, "Birthday gift to myself, my dream loft. Finally mine." No hashtags, no long explanation, no gushing. Just the simple statement of fact that left no room for them to claim any part in it. I posted it on my social media and then put my phone down, deliberately not refreshing the page for a while because I wanted to let it breathe, to give the image time to ripple through my friends, acquaintances, and eventually, inevitably, my family. When I finally picked it back up an hour later, the first wave of comments had already flooded in from friends and coworkers, all congratulating me, telling me how proud they were, asking questions about the place, and making jokes about finally having somewhere to host parties. It was warm, genuine support from people who actually cared, and for a moment, I let myself enjoy that before the second wave started coming in, the family comments. It started innocently enough. My cousin wrote, "Wow, this is amazing, congratulations." My aunt commented, "This is gorgeous, can't wait to see it." But then the tone began to shift as the people who had been absent all morning suddenly realized what they were looking at. My mother's comment appeared, "When did this happen? Why didn't you tell us?" A few minutes later, my brother chimed in with, "Since when were you looking for a place? Would have been nice to know." Then came a private message from my dad asking, "Why are we finding out about this on Facebook?" The irony of their sudden urgency was almost laughable, considering how many of my milestones had passed without more than a passing acknowledgement from them. I replied to a few of the public congratulations with a polite thank you, and to my mother's comment with, "It all happened while you were busy." I didn't elaborate, didn't apologize, and didn't invite them to come see it. My brother messaged me privately, clearly irritated, asking why I was being so dramatic and accusing me of trying to make them look bad. I told him calmly that there was nothing dramatic about it. I had simply shared a piece of my life the same way they had always shared theirs, and if they didn't like the timing or the fact that they weren't involved, maybe they should think about why that was. I could almost hear the silence on the other end of that conversation. The thing that struck me most in that moment was how quickly they shifted from indifference to outrage the second they realized they had been left out of something they couldn't recreate, something they couldn't retroactively insert themselves into. They had missed the opportunity to be part of this, and now all they could do was react to the finished product, the end result of months of work they hadn't even known I was doing. And it wasn't like this was a vacation or a random splurge. This was permanent, a visible, undeniable achievement that said, in no uncertain terms, that I was doing just fine without their involvement. As the evening went on, the texts and calls kept coming, but I didn't rush to answer any of them. I let them sit, the same way my birthday had sat unnoticed by them for so many years. Friends kept congratulating me, sharing the post, tagging me in comments, and I couldn't help but notice the difference in tone. My friends' messages were joyful, celebratory, genuine, while the family ones carried an edge of irritation, as if I had broken some unwritten rule by not making them the first to know. What they didn't realize was that this was never about the loft itself, at least not entirely. It was about showing them, without a single argument or confrontation, that I didn't need their validation, their approval, or their presence to accomplish something worth celebrating. And just when I thought the day couldn't get more revealing, my phone lit up with my brother's name again, this time a call instead of a message. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something told me this conversation was going to be worth having. I answered, and the first thing out of his mouth wasn't "congratulations" or "I'm happy for you," but "what the hell, you couldn't even tell your own family?" I smiled to myself, not because his anger amused me, but because it confirmed exactly what I'd known all along, that their problem wasn't with what I'd done, but with the fact that they hadn't been able to control the narrative around it. And in that moment, I knew the real conversation, the one I had been building toward for years, was about to begin. The moment I heard my brother's voice, sharp and already halfway into an argument before I had even said hello, I knew exactly where the conversation was going, and I knew I wasn't going to let it follow the same script it always had in the past, where I ended up defending my feelings while he and the rest of the family minimized them into something petty or overly sensitive. He started right in with accusations about how I was trying to make the family look bad and how it was pretty messed up that they had to find out about something this big from a social media post rather than from me directly. As though he had somehow forgotten the decades of moments in my life that they had either skipped entirely or brushed off like they weren't worth marking. I listened without interrupting, letting him get it all out, because I wanted every ounce of his frustration to come through before I spoke. When he finally paused long enough for me to respond, I didn't raise my voice or get emotional. I just told him, in a steady, measured way, that I hadn't told them because there was no reason to believe they would have cared in any meaningful way. I reminded him that my birthdays had been skipped for years under the same tired excuse about them being too close to the holidays, that no one had thought twice about missing my celebrations, that no one had made an effort to be present for my milestones, and that after enough repetitions of the same pattern, it had simply become clear to me that my life events weren't something they prioritized. I told him, point blank, that it hadn't even occurred to me to tell them about the loft until it was done, because why would I invite them into something they had shown, time and time again, that they weren't interested in being part of? He tried to argue that this was different, that a loft wasn't the same as a birthday, that I was punishing them for the past, but I cut him off and told him that the difference he was talking about was only in his head. To me, it was all the same, a moment in my life that was important to me, one they could have been involved in if they had shown over the years that my important moments mattered to them. I told him that I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply doing what they had done to me for years, living my life without making them a part of it. And unlike the countless times they had done it to me, I wasn't hiding behind excuses about being too busy or too tired. I was being completely honest. The silence that followed was thick, and I could almost hear him processing the fact that there was no real comeback to that. Eventually, he mumbled something about talking to our parents, and the call ended on that awkward, unresolved note that I had been expecting. Within the hour, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother, her voice laced with that particular mix of guilt and defensiveness that I had come to recognize over the years. She said she didn't understand why I felt the need to shut them out, that she and my father would have been happy to celebrate with me if they had known, that I should have given them the chance. That was when I told her, without any sugarcoating, that they had been given the chance for over 30 years, and they had chosen, time and again, not to take it. I said I didn't believe for a second that they would have dropped everything to celebrate this any more than they had done for my birthdays or other milestones, and that I was done pretending otherwise. She started to protest, but I didn't let her finish. I told her this wasn't about the loft, or even about the birthday. Not really. It was about the fact that I had learned, through years of experience, exactly where I stood with them, and I had adjusted my expectations accordingly. I wasn't angry anymore. That was the part she didn't seem to grasp. I was simply done expecting something they were never going to give. I told her that the loft was mine, that I was proud of it, and that I would decide who got to see it and when, and that at this moment, I didn't feel the need to invite them. The pause on the other end of the line told me she understood exactly what I meant, even if she didn't want to admit it out loud. By the end of the night, I had ignored several more messages from both of them, all circling the same point. Why didn't you tell us? Why weren't we involved? Why did you keep it a secret? And each time I read one, I felt the same quiet satisfaction, because the answer was right there, unspoken but undeniable. They hadn't been involved because they had trained me not to involve them. They had taught me, over years of being overlooked, that my life could and would go on without their input or approval, and now they were finally seeing what that looked like in action. In the days that followed, I kept things exactly as they were. I didn't extend an invitation for them to come see the loft. I didn't post follow-up pictures that might make them feel more included, and I didn't backtrack on anything I had said. Friends came over, we toasted to my new place, and I soaked in every moment of enjoying something that was fully mine. Meanwhile, my parents and my brother were left on the outside looking in, watching from a distance as I celebrated without them the same way I had watched them celebrate my brother's life for decades, while mine went largely ignored. And that was the real gift I gave myself that year, not just the loft, not just the independence, but the complete reversal of a dynamic that had weighed me down for most of my life. For once, I wasn't the one waiting for their acknowledgement. They were the ones waiting for mine. They still don't realize it, but that shift was my birthday present to myself, and it was worth far more than any party or card they could have given me. I had turned the tables without yelling, without begging, without trying to force them to see what they had done. I had simply shown them what life looked like when I finally stopped giving them the power to decide what was worth celebrating. And from where I was standing in my own space, with my own keys and my own hard-earned joy, I couldn't think of a better ending to the story they never saw coming.